Hi, Kevin.
Hello.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So, why don't we start off by just sort of explaining who you are and what you do?
Start off with the big question, right, Josh?
For sure. Let's get right into it.
All right. I guess there are probably three things that are important to know about me. One is that my I'm I'm overeducated. I've got a doctorate in sociology and psychology, and I've spent the last 30 years studying people. And the last decade, I've focused on the question, how can we still live well even when we're sick? And that brings us to the second crucial thing to probably know about me, and that is I live with multiple sclerosis, and I've had MS for, well, I've been symptomatic since '89, and it went undiagnosed or misdiagnosed for a long time there. And that's not unusual with MS at all. I was finally correctly diagnosed in 2006. So, living with MS. And for people who don't know what MS is, it's an autoimmune condition that causes our central nervous system, our brain, and our spinal cord to degenerate. And because everything we think, feel, do, say goes through our brain and our spinal cord, that means the symptoms can be almost anything. And probably the third thing that your listeners will be interested in is, in spite of all that, I am an enthusiastic skydiver. And I came back to the sport in 2019, and that's a whole big story I'm sure we'll get into. And I've logged 600 jumps since, and I'm a regular, fully licensed, rated skydiver.
So, why does it generally take so long? And in your case, why did it take so long to properly diagnose your symptoms as MS?
Because MS symptoms are potentially almost anything. So, in other words, a lot of people, in the popular mind, MS is, oh, one of those that put you in a wheelchair, right? And that's kind of the way we think about it. And that is true. That can happen, and certainly leg issues are one of my personal challenges. And sometimes they'll go spastic. Sometimes I have difficulty walking. I I never, almost never, and actually we can get into this. It's a little better now, but I don't have feeling below my knees, and so that's certainly part of it. But I'm always in pain, so chronic pain is part of it. I'm always fatigued. So I'm always tired. The best I ever get, even if I get a good night's sleep and I do everything right, which I do most of the time, the best I get is tired. And there's always cognitive fog that's going around. It's always, you know, a little bit confusing and a little bit fuzzy around the edges of my world. And so those are all things that are very common with MS and that I certainly live with as well.
How do you find that you keep your mental clarity during painful situations?
Well, I had to, and this is kind of an interesting thing because there was a time where my pain became so overwhelming. I was popping like 20 or more ibuprofen a day, and I refused to go on an opioid for it because just personally, I didn't want to go there. I didn't want that challenge that went along with it because I'd already known the research surrounding that at the time, and I thought that's just not an additional challenge that I wanted to take on at that point. So for me, managing pain was about retraining my brain and reframing the experience. And so I still feel pain. I still feel that pain is there. It's just not overwhelming. And it's probably fair to say I've reframed it so that I don't care any longer. And I did that through meditation and exercise and just rebuilding some different habits and in the way that I negotiated my world, even though it is has got this layer of pain over it.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to a quote that I found on your website, which was most of our challenges are non-medical, and I think you covered the changing of behaviors type of portion of it. So does your background in psychology assist you in changing the way that you approach like the altering of your behaviors?
Oh, it's crucial. It's crucial. It is one of those things that, you know, after I was diagnosed and I knew what I was dealing with, I started getting into the research surrounding MS. And then that wasn't enough. I was interested in other conditions because what I'm interested in as a social psychologist is not diagnosis specific. It's about, well, how do we deal with the experience of life with a chronic health condition that is not going to go away? How do we deal with that experience? And that's really crucial because, by definition, a chronic health condition is something that medicine doesn't have a cure for. They may someday, but they don't now. And I still have a life to live. I can't wait until medicine figures it out. So for me, I was interested in how can I use my education to help myself, but more important, to help other people as well. Because I've had the privilege of being really educated in a field that I care about a lot. And a lot of people don't have that luxury. And I got that. And so that means that I think because I had that privilege, I have an obligation to pull something out of that that's going to be useful. And so for me, that's why over the last decade I've focused on how do we live well with a health condition that's not going to go away. And that began with me and understanding my own conditions, but then, I'm a scientist. Research methodology is my primary specialization. So I did the research. And so I interviewed hundreds. I surveyed thousands. I built a scraper that went out on the web and collected 2.23 million data points. I did meta analyses across thousands of studies because I think we get too caught up sometimes in our specific diagnosis. And that's really crucial. And I don't want to downplay that because that gives us a, a label to hang it on and a way to understand it, but it also gives us access within the medical system to crucial treatments and supports. But day in and day out, that I have MS doesn't really help me better cope. What I live with is the experience of, oh, my legs aren't working right now, or oh, I'm in pain, or oh, I'm really fatigued. And there can be lots of different medical causes for that. And obviously, as we've already said, medicine can only do so much to help us. But we are not just bodies. We're bodies with brains and minds and behaviors and relationships and environments. And all of those things can be tweaked and modified to adapt to a life that we care more about and that we want to be engaged with. So, as a social psychologist who not only lives with a chronic illness but spent many years supporting a wife who was dealing with a very advanced cancer, I lived it not only as diagnosed but as caregiver. And I my educational background gave me kind of a unique set of concerns and a different lens into having this experience.
So, how were you able to manage while dealing with your own symptoms, also balancing the fact that you had to care for your wife?
Oh, I evidently I sucked on it, and evidently she did too. It completely blew up our relationship, and we'd known each other for decades, and had gone through a lot to do that. But year after year after year after year of two chronic illnesses in the house completely blew up our family. And that's another reason why I devoted myself to what I'm doing now, because even though I had the education, that's the knowing of it. That's not the understanding of living it. And I wished that I had somebody who could provide me with a better framework for understanding and living it back when I was first diagnosed or she was first diagnosed, right? And if I can do anything to help others not go through that level of pain and heartbreak and awfulness that I went through, then that means that I've pulled something good out of something really bad.
Why don't we backtrack and sort of begin with you sort of explaining your first sort of symptoms and how you were diagnosed?
Sure. So back in 1989, I had just turned 20 when this started, and I was in college and I was in a really demanding undergraduate academic program, and so it was stressful. So I started having weird experiences. My balance started just kind of going wonky on me. I started itching everywhere. I was tired. I was uh, mentally kind of foggy, and I got really down about the whole thing because that's a lot of little weird, kind of squishy, hard to define symptoms that are going on. And so after a few months of that, I went to the physician and he diagnosed me as clinically depressed. I was like, oh, okay, that could certainly be it, and I certainly had those symptoms, but I also had some other symptoms that were not associated with, the depression. So he sent me on to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist confirmed that I was dealing with a major depression and put me on drugs. And I tried the first one, it didn't work. I tried the second one, it didn't work. I tried the third one, it didn't work. And so my diagnosis got added with the tag treatment resistant. and so they just kind of left it at that. And then a few months later, I felt better again and kind of went back into my normal life. And so then there were spells of this sort of thing that kind of came and went over the next few years. And the worst one was in the late 90s. And by this time I had gone through all the coursework from my doctorate. I'd set my comprehensive exams. And I was now teaching at a couple of universities, and I was writing on my dissertation. And the wheels just came off my life. I was, again, dealing with the fatigue and the cognitive fog. And I didn't know what it was. And I slipped into a really deep depression. And this time, in under 2 years, I gained 120 pounds. I went from what had normally been a 27-inch waist to barely squeezing into a 46-inch pant. And so everything had just kind of come apart, and I didn't really understand what it was. So one morning I wake up and I walk into the bathroom and I look at myself in the mirror, and it was like I was really seeing myself for the first time in a couple of years. And I thought, oh my gosh, I look like the guy who ate Kevin. So I very slowly, very carefully started trying to rebuild the habits that I had lost in my life and started exercising again, stopped eating out all the time. I stopped, up to that time, I had probably drunk 2 liters or more of Mountain Dew a day for years. And, I quit soft drinks. I started exercising again. I started eating healthy again. I started meditating again. And, within the next couple of years, I was back down to a me that I could recognize. So yeah, within 4 years there, I gained and lost 120 pounds. And life was back on. I got my dissertation finished, and we settled down and started having a family, and went on with my professor career, and then things were going pretty well until 2002. And in 2002, I woke up one morning and I couldn't feel my left leg below my knee. I thought, that's kind of weird. But I figured I'd just like overdone my workout the day before, maybe pinched a nerve or something like that. So I didn't think a lot about it. And in a few days, it was back to normal. And I thought, okay, that's good. And then it was gone again, and then back, and then it started happening with different body parts. And I just lived with this for a while, and until finally one morning I woke up and I could feel my right arm and my head, but the rest of my body was gone. And at this point, my then wife said, I'm putting my foot down. You're going to go get this looked at. So I did, and that kickstarted, a series of consults and tests and stuff like that. And I eventually walked away with, or limped away with, an MS diagnosis. And so that was, and by this time it's 2006. So a relatively common story with MS. It takes a long time to diagnose because it's often a diagnosis of exclusion. They go through all of the other more likely explanations that it could be, until you're left with MS. And then in my case, once they got a high quality MRI, they could tell that there had been lesions all through my brain and spinal cord and had been around for a long time.
Did you find that there was a sense of like relief knowing what it was that was going on with you, finally having a diagnosis?
You betcha. And that's really common. It's on the one hand, it's never pleasant to get a diagnosis like that, but it is such a relief to have a name for what the weirdness is, and it's such a relief to then have a body of knowledge that you can start kind of diving into, and helping yourself understand more of what it is you're dealing with. And of course, it's really crucial to get that label, to get that diagnosis, so that you can get access to whatever medical care is available at the time. And of course, it's not they're not going to cure me, and they may or may not come up with a cure in my lifetime. I'd be delighted if they did. But there are good disease modifying drugs for MS out there. And a DMD is not a drug that is helping my symptoms, for example. But what it does mean is that over the course of this disease, I am likely to have less degeneration and likely to maintain a higher level of functioning for longer, and likely to have fewer exacerbations and less serious exacerbations. So that's all good.
So, what was your treatment plan upon discovering that MS was your diagnosis? Did your doctor sort of go over um, like a multi-step treatment plan? Was there like any setbacks within that?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, our medical system is geared to, here's a drug, here's a surgery, here's something, do this, and then go live your life normally. And there's not a lot of, they're just not trained that way. So I was put on a disease modifying drug, and back then the only disease modifying drugs for MS were injectable. So I just started injecting myself several times a week, and that's no fun. And some of your listeners may be living with diabetes, and they certainly know it's no fun to inject yourself all the time. But that's what I was living with. And then a few years later, the first oral meds for MS came out on the market, and I switched to one of those. So there's that drug, and then there's also for various symptoms, they'll try something that may help. So in other words, for MS, it's common to take some kind of pain medication. It's common to take some kind of medication for fatigue and for confusion or focus. So they cross purpose some drugs for anxiety, ADHD, depression, that sort of thing, for treatment of some MS symptoms. And I've tried some of those over the years, and most of them didn't work real well for me for very long. So I find symptom management for me is more effective with cognitive and emotional and behavioral and environmental changes.
That's so interesting to me because that goes along the lines of something that doctors don't necessarily recommend much are like lifestyle changes, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
behavioral or mental. So I guess that would bring us to some of your um, uh, like the skydiving and some of the things that you've been doing to mitigate the mental aspect of it. So can you go into some of the things that you've done lifestyle wise to adapt?
Yeah, certainly on the more conventional front, then I start my day with meditation, and I lift weights and I row, and so I'm working my body and working my mind, and then I also spend some time writing each morning, and so those are things that I do that are not only intrinsically good, they help me build and keep the necessary capacity I need so that I can go through a day and build a life that I'm interested in living. The one that is probably more extreme and unusual is skydiving for me. Is therapy. It is and the story behind me in skydiving, I'll give you like the really brief synopsis. I wanted to be a skydiver from the time I was a kid in the 70s. I thought it was fascinating. I really wanted to do it. In the 90s, while I was in graduate school, I did the training for the first time and I got a handful of jumps in, but skydiving isn't really a hobby, it's a lifestyle choice. It demands a lot of time and energy. And I just could not do that and complete a doctorate at the same time. So that had to kind of be put on the back burner. And then, so education and career and then family and young kids, and then eventually health got in the way. And I, eventually despaired of ever being able to go back and get to it. So when I hit my absolute bottom a few years ago, and I had had a really serious exacerbation that had taken out a good chunk of my right frontal temporal region. And so I'm dealing with severe cognitive issues, emotional regulation, social signaling, lots of stuff like that. I mean, it just really destroyed our family. And so I'm alone. And then my dog even died traumatically in front of me. And I, so my career's in shambles. Nothing that I wanted out of life could I see a path toward again. And I really despaired of ever finding a way. And so I thought, I will give myself finally at the end of the rope. I literally couldn't see a path forward. I thought, I'm going to give myself one more shot. I'm going to give myself one more chance to try to reclaim something that I value about my life and that gives me confidence and hope in life, that I can still build something out of this mess that I value. So I said, I'm going to go back and become a skydiver. And that was in 2019. So I had to go back and, I did the training again and started now to get your A license. That's your first license in skydiving, generally takes 25 jumps. I was dealing with wonky legs that didn't want to stay in control, and I couldn't feel the wind on my legs. So I wasn't getting the right kind of sensory input that I needed. And so it took me 47 jumps to get my A license. And I had to do a lot of extra work in the vertical wind tunnels with an instructor right there who was like holding my leg in position, saying, this is exactly where it needs to be, so that I could learn. Even though I couldn't feel on like below my knee, I could feel the tension, say, in my tendons behind my knee, there in my lower, my lower thigh. So I had to get creative. I had a really good team of people at the drop zone that worked with me and helped me, and I got my license. And in 2019, I logged around 140 jumps or so. And then in 2020, I set myself a bigger goal. I said, I want to be a serious skydiver. And so what would that mean? Well, 500 jumps in skydiving is kind of an important milestone. 500 jumps is when you're qualified for all the levels of licensing in the sport and you are eligible for professional ratings. So, I wanted to do that. And what that would mean was if I were to do it in 2020, I would have to, from where I was then, I would have to log better than a jump a day in 2020. So I set a goal of at least 366 jumps in 2020. And I logged 370 and I broke 500 and I got my licenses and I got my coach rating. And so I came out a serious rated regular licensed skydiver. And that was really crucial to me. That was like, this is something that was for me a big goal, a stretch goal, a goal that I didn't know whether I could achieve with my body and my brain. Because the very first thing they tell you when you're diagnosed with multiple sclerosis is avoid stress. Well, skydiving is an inherently stressful activity. Flinging your body at the earth is not natural under any circumstances.
So how did it feel for you to finally hit that goal, something that you didn't think was even possible for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was I was really proud of myself for the first time in a long time. Because on the one hand, I went back to skydiving to reclaim a childhood dream that I thought I'd lost. But on the other hand, I'm not naturally a fearful person, but I had become afraid of my own body because my own body had betrayed me so many times in so many different creative ways. And when you skydive, you have to be able to save yourself. I mean, you're putting yourself into in a circumstance where you're headed to the earth at 120, 150, 200 miles an hour, whatever, depending on the orientation that you're flying in. And there will come a point where you've got to deploy your own parachute or you're going to die. Now, we do have all kinds of safeties and backups and that sort of thing. But nevertheless, every time you exit, you've got to deploy your chute and you've got to pilot yourself to a safe landing. And putting myself into a position where I had to do that every single day, that was that was a big stretch goal for me. And that gave me a lot of confidence that I could then carry into the rest of my life. Because I can say, yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm the kind of guy who can fling myself to earth and save myself every time.
And you said that the first thing a doctor will tell you is to avoid stressful situations. So, do you find that there are different types of stressful situations, some that would benefit you and some that would not? Skydiving being one of the things that would be beneficial.
That is a wonderful question, and this is a topic that I spend a lot of time on in the book. Your Life Lived Well, snazzy book, snazzy cover, um, and there are two different kinds of stress. Okay, they're called distress, bad stress, and eustress, EU stress. Right, eustress is good stress, and they're right next to one another at what I call the edge. So think of the edge as a ratio. Whatever you have in front of you to do, whatever task it has a certain demand to it. In other words, there's certain things that you're going to have to do in the right way in order to succeed. And we also have a certain capacity that we're walking around with in the world. And if your capacity is really high and your demand is really low, well, you're going to succeed all the time and things are going to be very easy. But as we are more challenged and that demand comes closer and closer to the capacity we can deliver in that moment, we start triggering the stress response, okay, our acute stress response. And that acute stress response, sometimes we call it the fight or flight response, and we talk about it being fear, but it's not. It's not really fear, it's challenge. When our system senses a challenge in front of us, it's going to amp us up so that we have our bodily resources, our cognitive resources available to handle a really targeted task right here, right now, in this moment. And then, if the demand reaches over the capacity we can deliver, well, that's still stressful, right? But now it's distressing. This is eustress going up here. Now it's distressing, and we are overwhelmed, and we will fail. And if it's really quite a bit more demand than the capacity we can deliver in that moment, then this is trauma. And we have to understand that we have physical challenges, but we also have cognitive challenges, emotional challenges, behavioral challenges, social challenges, all those things. And if we start looking at the world as challenges rather than as fear, that's the first step in that reframing. Because fear isn't the acute stress response. Fear is how we've framed the acute stress response. Fear is how we framed it when we say, oh, there's a challenge in front of me, and I don't believe I can succeed. I am likely to fail, and that's going to hurt, or that's going to have consequences that I'm really trying to avoid. And fear is the next layer beyond pain in our system. So pain is a really ancient somatic bodily system that warns us away from something that could be negative and harmful to us. Fear gives us a little more distance and a little more warning, okay? But it's doing the same kind of thing. And what we have to understand is that our fear responses are adapted to be overly conservative. So in other words, they're adapted to be overly protective. They're things, and you've had this experience. Everybody listening has had this experience where there's something they feared, and then they got into it, and they were like, "Oh, I can do this. This is a really cool experience, right?" And so we have to learn to better interrogate our that fear response, because sometimes it's holding us back when it should, and we should listen to it, but sometimes it's holding us back because it's overprotective. And with skydiving, you see all the fear is on the inside of the door. When you are on the inside of the door, those first few jumps, you're looking out and it's like, this is freaking crazy. But once you are out on the other side, it is the most mindful, present, in this moment living that you will ever experience. And it is joyful and it's amazing. But you got to go through the fear to get to it.
Yeah, it seems that most spiritual experiences require you to sort of befriend your fear, sort of put it in
Mm-hmm.
its proper function and surrender to it in a way. And then, like you said, on the other side of fear is joy and true
Yes.
spirituality. So, can you talk a little bit about what it feels like to be falling, from thousands of feet in the air spiritually?
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because spiritual experiences are commonly like that because they are edge experiences. And they're another, that's part of those crucial edges that we have to interrogate. And so for me, the experience of hurtling through the sky. Now, the first thing that's important for people to understand is you don't feel like you're falling when you're skydiving. You feel like you're floating. You feel like you're flying. And the reason is because there's nothing nearby to give you the context of falling. So you're just out there. And occasionally there's a cloud or there's another person or something, and that gives you a little context, but you feel like you're flying, you're floating. And that is an amazing, no pun intended, uplifting experience that is joyful. You feel weightless, suspended in this, and and it has a characteristic of a spiritual experience in another way. And the second way is, on the one hand, you feel really, really small and tiny and insignificant in the midst of this enormous, endless sky. And you see all the works of humanity spread out below you, and the city looks tiny and all that, and you feel small. But at the same time, paradoxically, you also feel expansive. You feel so large and so big and so connected to everything. And it's just because you're seeing the world from horizon to horizon. And you are out there, and especially on days when they're like really beautiful clouds that nobody gets to see except from, it's only skydivers and pilots that get to see it from this perspective, and pilots have a window in between them, and or like on a sunset load or a sunrise load, where you've got the beautiful magic hour colors that are filling the sky, and you are there with your friends, and you are, like, say, tracking along the edge of a cloud, and that is a beautiful, glorious experience. So, and then, at like 20 seconds or 20, like at 5,000 feet, you've got 27 seconds left to live. And that's kind of high for experienced skydiver to deploy at, but generally we'll be deployed by 3,000 feet. And 3,000 feet, you've got about 18, 16 seconds to live, something like that. And so the experience of waving off and deploying your parachute is, and then suddenly, and you're just flying among the clouds, right? And you're flying in the air, and you want to turn left, you want to turn right, you want to spin, you want to, whatever you want to do, you're flying. And I had a jump a little over a year ago where, if you look on my social media, you can see the little video clip that I posted about it, where as I'm flying, a bald eagle makes a couple of strafing runs on me, and then he comes right in ahead of me and flies in formation with me. Now, how can something like that not be just an an awesome, humbling experience? And I find skydiving, yeah, it makes me feel competent, and yeah, like I've got this, but it is also humbling. And I'm not a religious person, in a traditional sense in any way, but the only way I can describe it. So the basic way of skydiving, you've seen it, is called belly to earth. And we're making like a big X in the sky. And then if you want to shoot forward and you want to travel along, then you sweep your arms back and you extend your legs so that you look like Iron Man. Okay. And so you can, in less than a second, accelerate from 120 miles an hour to 200 miles an hour. I mean, that is mind blowing, right? And when you do that, the only way I can explain this, the way that it feels, is it feels like the hand of God just reaches up below you and pushes you through the sky, because you can feel that air, and you just get into this groove, and it's just, and it's an amazing, awesome spiritual feeling.
That's beautiful.
And almost everyone, I mean, a lot of times we'll call it the church of altitude.
Mm-hmm. So the cover of your book,
Mm-hmm.
at what point during the jump was that photo taken, and how was that photo taken?
Yeah,
Because that's
that's
so
a
cool.
great. People say don't judge a book by their cover, but I wanted a cover that was the story of the book, and so I had a really specific image in my head that I wanted to be on the book, and so it took us 8 jumps over 6 weeks, because the atmospheric conditions had to be just right. I had to have the sun on the horizon, and we had to jump, and I had to orient it so it was behind me, and I wanted some big, beautiful, puffy clouds at the right place, and so On this jump, that cloud layer is about 4,000 feet. So I had to be a little bit above it. So that's about 5,000 feet when I'm pulling to get the right look. So I had to hit my mark, and my cameraman had to come in and get it framed up perfectly, and we to get that shot. And we'd only have one shot at it a day because you can't get down and back up again and still have the sun where I needed it to be and all that. So what I'm doing on that cover is my hands are, you can see my hands up on my forehead, and I'm about to make this big sweeping gesture as I extend my arms out. And that's a universal skydiving gesture. All skydivers recognize this. It's called the wave off. And the wave off is, so we've done our free fall and we've had our fun, and we've done formations or free flying or whatever it is that we're doing. And now we have to get separate from one another so that we can each safely deploy our parachutes. So we track away from one another and we give the wave off signal, and the wave off signal says to everybody in my airspace, watch out, I'm about to take action to save myself and deploy my parachute. And that's the message that I wanted to get across to people with the cover of this book. When you pick up this book, you are about to take action to save yourself. And you may feel like you are out of control, like you're free falling through your life, like you are overwhelmed by all the circumstances of your life. But right now, you do this and you are about to take action to save yourself.
So, along with the book and all of the experience that you have, what sort of things do you offer in the realm of living your life well?
Yeah, as a social behavioral scientist, I focus on all the non-medical ways that we can improve our quality of life. And by improving our quality of life, coincidentally, we also often improve our health in some way as well. But I'm not focused on the health part of it. I'm focused on all the stuff that the medical therapeutic community doesn't focus on. That's and again, we've got chronic conditions, right? So medicine doesn't have a solution for what we're doing. They're just giving us something to maybe help manage some symptoms or something like that. Well, I'm interested in living a good quality life, and I want other people to live a good quality life. And so uh, we do seminars and webinars and guidance sessions, and in a few months there'll be a mobile app, and all these tools that are about helping you figure out which ones of these things are going to work for you. So what I want to really emphasize, and it's this point of difference, and that is a lot of people out there are pushing, well, here is the way that you need to live in order to live a good life. And somebody else has their way, and somebody else has their way, and none of them agree. And all of them will work for someone, but only some of them will work for you. So, what I'm interested in is helping you develop the tools so that you can make better decisions for building the path that's going to work for you. Because your path isn't my path. Yeah, maybe you'll end up wanting to jump out of an airplane, but I'm not going to push that on anybody who doesn't want to do it. And so with the book, with the curriculum, with the other materials, it's about giving you tools that are grounded in thousands of studies and decades of cognitive and behavioral and social and emotional and biomedical science that says these are things that work, but here's how you make a choice for which things can work for you. because
Fantastic.
I don't want to be, yeah, I don't want to be a guru. I don't want to be, anything like that. I don't want anybody to follow my path. I want to empower people to be confident in their own paths.
Yeah, there's not enough of that for sure. And I really appreciate that perspective and all the work that you do. And thank you so much for being a part of this. Um, where can we find you?
You can find me at yourlifelivedwell.co, and yourlifelivedwell.co will have, we've got all the links to all the social, on social. Your Life Lived Well is your LL Well on pretty much all the platforms. And I am personally Dr. KJ Payne, DrKJPAYNE, pretty much everywhere.
Perfect.
So you can certainly find those. There's the Your Life Lived Well podcast, which is it's an informational podcast, and it's available anywhere you want to consume your podcast.
Kevin, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And your story is very inspiring.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm delighted if people find it inspiring. But what I care about is what we do after the inspiration fades, because the inspiration will fade. So how do we keep going? And anybody out there who wants to talk or anything, I am delighted to help others in their journeys to try to still live full lives, even if we have a diagnosis, even if we're a caregiver, even if we're medical health wellness professionals who are trying to figure out ways to do better for our patients but still maintain a life for ourselves. So thank you again, Josh, so much. I appreciate it.